Hello, and welcome back for another video tutorial. My name is Caleb, and today I'm going to be going over how to deploy a Synapse chat server by Matrix. We're going to be using an external database, and for that we're going to be using Postgres that is also going to be hosted inside a separate container. Before we get too far into it, I do want to cover that there is lots of documentation available. If you go to matrix.org, as you can see, they have a very professional website with all the specifications, a blog, documentation, and other resources. Definitely check that out if you have any questions about Synapse or Matrix. We're going to be pulling our image from Docker Hub. So if you go to hub.docker.com and do a quick search for Synapse, you'll pull this page here and you'll see the synopsis for Synapse, as well as a lot of the common configuration switches that will work with it. So you can go back and use that as a reference if you have any questions or you experience any difficulty, which you shouldn't because this is pretty straightforward. Also, we're going to be pulling the Postgres container from Docker Hub. Do a search on Docker Hub for Postgres. It'll bring you to this page with the synopsis as well as configuration switches that are available. Okay, without further ado, here I have a virtual machine with Alpine installed. Alpine is a distribution of Linux that is very stripped down, almost naked. It's basically just the Linux kernel. Even a lot of common tools that Linux users are used to having installed by default are not installed on this. Even netstat, for example, is not installed by default. Inside this particular VM, the only thing I have is the Docker engine. I do already have some VMs running on this particular machine, but we're not going to look at those. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to copy and paste a command in here, and then I'll explain it. Okay, so we have a very basic or standard Docker run command, but I'm going to go ahead and run through it just in case we have some new or unfamiliar users. So we have docker run. That's the command that instructs Docker to spin up a new container, and then there's a number of switches that you'll use to instruct it on how to do that. The first thing we have is tac-it, which means we want it to be an interactive container. Then we have tac-rm. That's short for remove. What that switch does is after the container starts up and executes whatever command you tell it to execute, it's going to spin back down, come to a stop, and automatically remove itself from Docker. And I'll explain why we do that here in just a minute. Then we have tac-name. We're naming this container Synapse. We're doing tac-e to set an environment variable. The first one is Synapse server name, which is an important field that on most Synapse installs is critical that you get right the first time because you can't easily go back and change it. But just because of the intrinsic, the way Docker does things, it's very easy to go back and change this if you have an issue, if you're doing it from a container. But that is an important environment variable. The next environment variable is Synapse report stats. This is the checkbox that you would see usually in GUIs that offers you to send anonymous usage data to Matrix or to the developers. Crash reports, things like that. I'm not a fan of sharing that type of data with anybody, so I did set that to no. The default is yes, though. Next, we have tac-v, which establishes a volume. We're using the kind of the standard file path in Docker, which is var lib docker volumes, and then I'm creating a volume called Synapse, and inside of that, a folder called config, and then we're linking that to the /data folder that's going to exist inside the container. The next part is the image that we're going to be using, which is matrix.org, spelled out, /synapse. And then we're going to invoke a command, which is generate. What this is going to do is spin up the container, generate a default configuration file called homeserver.yaml, excuse me. It's going to generate that default configuration file, then it's going to spin down the VM and it's going to remove it. We need to go in and modify that configuration file before we spin up the persistent version of our Synapse server, which I'll show you. Now currently, I don't even have the image downloaded, so when I issue this command, the first thing it's going to do is locate and pull the latest Synapse image from Docker Hub. We'll give that a moment to complete. Okay, as we can see, it says a config file has been generated in /data/homeserver.yaml for server name chat.mydomain.com. We're going to go in here in a couple of minutes and modify that to meet our needs. But first, we are going to spin up our Postgres container. So I'm going to paste in another command here, and I'm just going to run through this one real quick. So again, we have docker run, tac name, and the name of this container is going to be Synapse tac Postgres. Then we're going to set the environment variable Postgres user equals Synapse. That's going to be the username for our Postgres container. Next environment variable is going to be Postgres password, which is going to be password in all caps. I strongly suggest you make this a strong password, but for this lab demonstration, I'm going to use an easy to remember and easy to type one. The next switch is tac P for port. What this next part is it's saying that we are going to expose port 5432 on the outside of the container, that's on Alpine, to port 5432 on the inside of the container. This is important. Most applications have like standard ports that they use, and this is where you're going to use the same port on the inside and the outside, except if you have multiple instances of the same application type, you won't be able to use the same port. But on the inside of the container, it's expecting connections on a specific port. In this case, it's 5432. So if we were to stand up another Postgres container, we might change the exposed port to 5433 on the outside, and then map it to 5432 on the inside. That way, every Postgres container thinks its connections are coming in on the standard port, but then you'll have to manage the connections on how they come in to the non-standard port. The next switch is tac V again to establish a volume, standard Docker location, var lib docker volumes. Our volume is going to be called synapse-postgres, and then inside there's a folder called config. That'll be mapped on the inside of the container to /var lib postgres ql /data, which is the default location for database storage in a Postgres container. We're going to do tac D, which means detach. So once this container spins up, it's going to return my prompt back to Alpine instead of sticking to the Postgres container. And then it's going to invoke, it's not going to invoke the Postgres command. We're specifying that last Postgres there at the end is specifying the image that we want to use. I don't have this image either, so when I hit enter, it is going to go locate and download that image, and then it's going to spin up that container. And when this is done, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually go inside of the Postgres container to do some modifications real quick. So I'm going to paste in this command docker exec tac it. That means I want to create a console session that's interactive to the synapse-postgres container. I'm going to invoke the command psql tac u synapse. That's my username. And that will dump me into the container operating from the PSQL console. Okay, so the reason why I'm here is because by default, when you spin up a container, it starts with a default database with the name of the container as the database. So I'm going to issue the \c command. What that does is it disconnects all of the databases it disconnects the database that I was just connected to, and I'm going to issue the command drop database synapse. What that will do is remove the database that was created. Oh, hold on a second. Let me do \c Postgres. I forgot part of that command. Okay, now we're going to drop database synapse. There we go. Okay, so it dropped to the database. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the database with some specific configuration on it that is required by Matrix, specifically the UTF-8 encoding. So this will create the new database inside of our Postgres container. We're going to exit, and now we're back in Docker. So now we've spun up a Synapse container for just a split second, long enough to generate a default configuration file called homeserver.yaml. We've spun up our Postgres database and established the database that Matrix is going to use. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go modify homeserver.yaml, which is the configuration file that Synapse uses to operate. And we're going to tell it to use our Postgres database instead of the SQLite database that is embedded by default. Okay, so I'm going to issue this command, and we are going to go modify that homeserver.yaml file. Okay, so here we are inside of the configuration file, homeserver.yaml. You can see it took the environment variables and applied them to this configuration file already. So chat.mydomain.com is there, as well as all the kind of the default stuff. What we're after here, though, is this database section. First thing we're going to do is delete SQLite 3, and we're going to put in PSYCOPG2. Under arguments, we're going to add a few arguments. The first one is going to be user is Synapse. Excuse me. The next one is password, which is password. Next one is database, but this we're going to name it Synapse because that's the name of the database we created when we were in the SQL container just a moment ago. Next one is host, which is Synapse-Postgres. And then the last two are cp-min 5 and cp-max 10. And then we're going to write that out, and we should be good for the next step. Okay, so we now have the homeserver.yaml configuration file properly configured. I'm going to paste in the next command. This is going to spin up the persistent standing container that's going to host Synapse. So walking through this just one more time, docker run tac-d to detach, tac name Synapse, tac link Synapse tac Postgres :db. This is telling this container that it's going to have a connection to another container called Synapse-Postgres. Tac v, we're going to point to the same volume mapping that we had before. We're going to again call out the environment variable for Synapse server name. We're going to turn off Synapse report stats. And we're going to expose port 8008 on the outside of the container to port 8008 on the inside of the container. And we're going to be using the matrix.org/synapse image, which we already downloaded. So when I hit enter now, it's going to give me an identification number that shows that Docker did in fact spin up this container. So the first thing we're going to do, just to double check our work here, we're going to do a docker logs. And then we're going to do Synapse -Postgres. So as you can see, Synapse container is up and running. And then we're just going to do docker logs Synapse. And we can see that Synapse is running. The next thing that we have to do, one of the last things here, is we have to go into the Synapse container and create our first user account so that we can go in and start setting stuff up. To do that, we're going to issue the command docker exec tac-it synapse, and then the command that we are invoking inside the container is register new matrix user, tac user with the username, tac password with the password. Again, I'm using a very unsecure and bland password for this lab environment demonstration. And then I'm specifying what the config file is that we're adding this information to, which in this case is tac config /data homeserver.yaml. Now it should ask me, there it is, do we want to make this new user an admin? I'm going to say yes, because it's the first one. And as you can see, that command was successful. The next thing that we have to do is get an IRC chat client of some sort. The one that Matrix recommends, or the one that they market, is called Element, and that's the one that we're going to be using for this demonstration. Now, when you go to download Element on the matrix.org website, there's a couple options. One is a browser option, which, depending on your environment, may work. I went ahead and downloaded the Windows installer and installed the actual application itself. As you can see, it has a pretty sleek look to it. It looks pretty cool. I'm going to click on Sign In. By default, matrix.org is going to be there. This is a public chat server that's hosted by Matrix, and anybody can go in, establish an account, and then start creating rooms and chatting with whoever they want there. It's kind of like Discord, where you can create your own stuff, but it's hosted by, somewhere up in the cloud. We just set up our own server though, and that's the one that we want to connect to. So we're going to click Edit. Instead of matrix.org, we're going to say Other Home Server, and our home server, as it's configured right now, is http:// and then the IP address of the Alpine host. This is the actual virtual machine IP. Oh, my numlock is not on. Okay, and then I'm going to specify port 8008 because that's the port that we exposed from the container. I do plan on doing another video to show you guys how to change this and add in the S so that it's a secure connection, but that's going to be a separate video. I'm going to go ahead and click Continue, and it did recognize my home server. If it did not recognize that was in fact a Synapse server, it would have thrown an error message. So this means it was able to at least establish a connection to Synapse. And now I'm going to use the username and password that I set up with that last command. And there we are. I'm in. The first thing I'm prompted with is a help improve element box again, even though I already said report stats no in the actual Docker run command. It is still asking me again now that I've logged in. I do not want to send my statistics. Most important thing once you get signed into Element is to click down here on the gear and turn it to dark mode, because it's much cooler in dark mode. You can go in here, click on all settings, and kind of navigate your way around. There's a whole bunch of options that you can work through. It's very customizable, but overall it's a very sleek, it's a very simple IRC chat client. But again, you can use any chat client that you like. I have tried 3 different IRC clients with Matrix so far, and none of them have not worked. So they've all been successful. That's pretty much it. Matrix is a pretty interesting initiative. It's a collaborative effort that a lot of people have put a lot of work into. And one of the cool things that Matrix supports is bridges. So I've always used XMPP servers. One of my other YouTube videos is how to configure an OpenFire server. And one of the things you can do with Matrix is set up a bridge so that XMPP server users can talk to IRC server users in a relatively seamless fashion. I plan on doing another video on how to set that up here in short order. But that is another container that we would stand up called Bifrost. And that's a bridging solution between IRC and XMPP, which is a pretty cool thing. So I think that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free and drop a comment down in the box. If you found this video helpful, smash that like button and think about subscribing. Definitely supports the channel, and I really appreciate it. If you guys would like me to do videos on other technologies or other projects, feel free to leave those in the comments too. I'd love to make a video and teach somebody something somewhere. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you watching. God bless.